Welcome to the Cold Case Christianity broadcast, the only Christian case-making program hosted by a cold case homicide detective. J. Warner Wallace has been investigating cold case murders in Los Angeles County for over a decade. His work has been featured on Fox News, Court TV, and Dateline. For more information about Jim's work and the case for Christianity, please visit coldcasechristianity.com. Now, here's your host, J. Warner Wallace.
Thanks for joining us at Cold Case Christianity. I am J. Warner Wallace. We have been talking over the last several weeks in Season 5 of Cold Case Christianity about quick shot responses. These are the responses that we hope are rhetorically powerful short responses. And we talked in the past, too, about why we think we need to be able to offer our responses in the shortest possible amount of time. I think what's happening is the technology is making the changes for us. And so while I know my mom, for example, would far rather me give her a phone call than text her, would far rather her grandchildren call her than text her, I think she realizes at some point the technology is going to dictate this. If she wants to have the same kind of communication, look, we used to write letters and put them in the mail. And then eventually the technology forced us in a new direction. And we can either be early adopters of that technology or we can continue to resist. And what's happening here is I think that the technology is noisier and noisier. The internet provides us with all kinds of choices. Have you noticed that choices and the overabundance of choices is one of the chief causes of stress in your life and in my life? It's hard to be stressed out about a decision when you don't have a decision to make. You only got this one option. And what I see is that there's more and more anxiety and distrust in young people who are now been raised. These are digital natives. You and I, if you're my age, we came to this late. There was a time before there was an internet in my life. And that the choices were few. The choices for entertainment were few, right? You want to watch something, you watched on one of the big three networks. That was it. That's all that was available to you, those big three networks. If you missed that episode, you had to catch it in reruns. If you missed it in reruns, you have to hope the show gets syndicated. Otherwise, you will never have a chance to see that episode again. Now, we've got what feels like an infinite number of resources and options. Now, of course, it's not, but it's a lot bigger. All the cable networks, most of them will offer their stuff streaming online. You got Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu, you name it, you got it. There's lots of places. For example, production companies in the past, if they were going to make a show on TV, they had one of the three networks to work with. That's it. Those are your only options. You don't get picked up by one of those three, you don't get a show. Now, you can pitch a show to Netflix, you can pitch a show to Facebook, you can pitch a show to all kinds of different options. You can just do the show straight up on YouTube and create your own channel. With all those options, it means that young people have, I think, even more confusion about which option they should trust. But more importantly for our purposes in this season is that they are less likely to give any one of those options much time, right? Because if I can't capture your imagination in the first 60 seconds, click, keep on surfing. That first set of responses on your Google search or on your YouTube search has got 10 options for you. You'll watch the first video, let's go watch another one. So what it's doing is it's forcing us to have to be more powerful in a shorter period of time because people won't give you the old, 30 minutes to make a case. I think we're going to see this in jury arguments also. I started off in a generation of prosecutors who had no problem with spending 2 hours in their opening. I think we're going to have to figure out ways to be, I remember, I'll never forget this, I was in a church in Michigan, and in the church service, it was 2 services in the morning that I had to do a talk, and our talks are usually pretty robustly visual. My background was as a designer. I have a master's degree in architecture, a bachelor's degree in design before I became a police officer. And I thought it to be a high compliment when after the first service, an older lady came to me. She was probably about 10 years older than me. And she said, I want you to know that my husband did not fall asleep during your talk today. And I thought, well, okay. Apparently he usually does. And so I guess it's a compliment that whatever was visual enough and engaging enough And I try to take short breaks, turn corners every few, turn these corners, change the scene, change the idea, change the line, because you know that people got a short attention span these days. And it's becoming shorter and shorter based on the technology. So I considered that to be a compliment. After the second service, I had a young, someone closer to my age, who had teenage kids in the service with them. Here's what she said: "I want you to know that today my kids did not look at their phone." Okay, great. I guess we were engaging enough to keep their attention, because what happens in the minds of young people, and you know you're guilty of this too, is that any time I've got to be anywhere for more than 4 or 5 minutes, what am I doing? I'm looking at my phone. I'm trying to kill time. I don't even have the ability anymore to stand in a line for some service or for anything without, okay, this is killing me, I'm looking at my phone. I have to be constantly entertained. That means that our responses have to be engaging. And we've assembled all of these at coldcasechristianity.com. They're also in our phone app. They're called Quick Shots. And they're simply, we hope, powerful, short answers to the most common objections. And today we're going to answer an objection that I hear a lot, and here it is. It's this idea that, I don't really why would you need God to forgive you of something, or need a Savior to die in your place to offer you salvation? Look, what God cares about is just being a good person. I don't need religion or religiosity. I can be a good person without God. And that's what really matters, is just being a good person. Now, I would have said to you as an atheist, because I was an atheist until I was 35, that this is true. All you have to be is a good person, and I was a good person. I thought I was a good person. I was enforcing the law. I had a stable relationship for 18 years with my wife. We were raising kids. I'd accomplished a few things. I thought, okay, I'm a good person. How do you respond to somebody who takes that view? Because let's face it, Christianity is a solution to a problem. But if you don't think you have a problem to begin with, why do you need a solution? Let me give you a way you might respond to this. I'll put it on the screen for you. Here it is. Well, let me ask you, are you a good person? I mean, honestly, if you think the answer is yes, I often, when I was not a believer, I thought the answer was yes. But what standard of goodness are you really using to say that you're a good person? I mean, everyone thinks they're good by their own standard, right? I mean, Hitler thought he was good. I've got pictures of Hitler giving away Christmas presents to children. Everyone thinks that in their standard and under their standard, they can rationalize what it is to be good, and of course, they will qualify. When you say being a good person is all that really matters, right? You necessitate the existence of a true objective standard of good that's beyond your own personal opinion. Because if it's just your personal opinion, then Hitler's also good, because that was his personal opinion. When you say being good is all that matters, you need a standard that transcends your personal opinion. It even transcends cultural consensus, like, for example, the standard that was held by the German regime, right? That executed millions of Jews but found a way to call itself good. So if being good is all that matters, you're going to need a standard. You're going to have to default to God as your standard, because that would be the one standard that transcends all cultures, transcends all personal opinions. In other words, can you see why your claim does not eliminate the necessity for God, but instead actually requires a divine, objective, high, righteous standard that you are going to look at and compare and finally call something good? Because if it's just a matter of opinion, then everyone's good, because I don't think anyone's ever going to say they're not. So do you see how even the claim itself assumes something about the nature, the standard that we are calling goodness? That's a good way to start a conversation, right? Because it really assumes a Christian worldview. You assume a theistic worldview, at least, because you assume there is some type of transcendent standard that's outside of both your opinion and the opinion of your group, because groups can think they're good when they're not too. So if it's not the group that makes it good, and it's not the individual that makes it good, what's left? That's where we want to drive people. Let's take a break. When we come back, I'll give you another way to respond to this idea that all you have to do is be good, and being good is all that matters. Both of my boys were engaged in college to subject matter that was very secular in some way. One was a psychology major, one was a biochemist who did in anesthesiology. And I can tell you, those are disciplines where a lot of folks who aren't believers are involved in the educational process. So they were constantly faced with views that were not Christian views about the nature of mind, about do you have a mind or is it just a brain, about nature of chemistry and how chemistry perhaps and physics could explain everything in the universe. These were things they were faced with in college. And after it was over, I asked one of my sons, I said, so how did you get through it? What did you think was the most powerful tool you had in place or the most powerful approach that you took that kind of got you through it as a Christian? And because I look at him today and he's very, very committed in his views as a Christian. He said, well, Pop, you raised us with a healthy disrespect for professors. And I thought, oh no, that's not what I wanted to do as a father, to give you a disrespect. He said, no, I don't mean it that way. I don't mean in a negative way. He just knew, though, that he wasn't to take on face value anything someone was to say in a class without testing it, like a detective, without examining it, without applying the same processes we apply as investigators to any truth claim. If we believe everything a suspect tells us, no one ever goes to jail, okay? We have learned to be somewhat skeptical. That's a skill set that can serve you well. Because in the end, it's going to falsify certain claims, it's going to verify others, and it will give you great confidence as a Christian. That's what we want to do in forensic faith. We want to give you that skill set, the daily disciplines of a detective, that you can then apply to your Christian beliefs so that you can survive whatever trial that is that you're going to face, where your beliefs are going to be questioned. We're going to move you, hopefully, in this book from a blind faith to a forensic faith. Okay, in our first response to this, we really wanted to help them understand that the definition of good requires a standard that's not available to them unless they hold a theistic worldview. They can ground this idea of goodness in something beyond their personal opinion. And that's one good way to start, right? Where many times as we navigated these quick shots, as we've navigated these responses, we've said that really it's about helping people to define their terms. What do they mean when they make certain claims? They're using certain words, and you might assume that we all have a common understanding of that word, but we at least need to help them see that maybe their definition is wrong. And on the first view, we're arguing that the definition of good requires a transcendent objective authority, or you really are just in a matter of opinion. In this response, I want them to examine themselves, not just the definition of the word good, but who they really are when push comes to shove, right? This is one of the things that Jesus did so well in this Sermon on the Mount. I know a lot of respected Jewish broadcasters, radio hosts, who are not Christians. They're observant Jews, but they do go back in their mind. They don't accept the extension that Jesus offers on the Sermon on the Mount. The idea that, hey, you may think you're not a killer, but you have thoughts. You may think you're not cheating on your wife, but you have lustful thoughts. That your thoughts give you away is a whole nother level. And that makes sense if you think about it under a theistic worldview, right? If materialism is true and there is no God, and all we have in the universe are physical forces, then all that's really going to matter are physical outcomes. Did you end up behaving that way? What was the physical outcome? Your thoughts don't matter under that kind of worldview because all that matters are physical outcomes. But if theism is true, you are positing a God that is immaterial. And suddenly things like your immaterial thoughts count, whereas before they didn't. So it seems that Jesus is just kind of fleshing that out when he talks about this on the Sermon on the Mount. We're going to take that approach, use that as the shoulders on which we're going to stand as we offer this response as the second way to respond to this objection, second quick shot. Here we go. So let me ask you, are you a good person? I mean, would you consider yourself to be a good person? I mean, if you're like me, have you ever lied? I've lied. Have you ever taken something that wasn't yours? Have you ever cheated on your taxes or cut a corner probably, but they won't catch this? Have you ever tried to do that kind of well, I'm not really stealing from me. They got enough money. I can kind of cut that corner. It's not going to hurt anybody. No one's going to catch it. Have you ever even thought about such things? Now, I don't know how many people you are arrogant enough or are so prideful or so proud that they would say that they've never done anything wrong. I mean, I know I can't say that as much as I'd like to. You probably can't say it either. No one's thoughts and actions, especially if you lump in thoughts. Okay, you might say, well, I haven't done anything that from a physical action that really I would say is necessarily bad, but I don't think you could say that. But even if you could you say your thoughts are that clean? Come on. If being a good person is all that really matters, like you said, then you and I don't matter, okay? Because we aren't consistently good. There's lots of times when we just navigate into what is known and what is not known by our peers. So at least we settle on, hey, they don't know what I'm thinking. They don't know what I'm doing right now. I can keep it a secret. Why would anyone think they're good in the first place if that is the case? And that is the case. And you know it's the case for yourself as well as for me. But we need to challenge this notion when people say that they're good to begin with. Paul says it in Romans 7, right? I want to do things that I know I should do, and I just don't do them. And then I do these things that I know I shouldn't do, I don't want to do. We are constantly, that's just the human condition. We all know whatever your standard is, unless your standard is that I can do whatever I want, and sometimes if I mess up, it's not really a mess up because I think mess ups. I mean, you have to kind of change the definition and change your standard. It has to be so flexible in order. You've got a standard, but I bet you break your own standard. Because we all do. Unless we're willing to say, no, our standard is so flexible it can't be broken. Then it's not a standard. I mean, let's be realistic about this. So what we want to do is help people to see, well, if being good is all that matters, what in the world are you thinking? Do you think you're that good? What kind of an arrogant person thinks that they've never done anything wrong? We need to help people to kind of see that it's not just a matter of what is the nature of good, but regardless of what the nature of good is, even if it's just personal, you still violate it. You still got a problem. Even if we could define good to suit your terms, to suit your to serve you in a way that you want it to serve you, you're still going to be violating this. You can't get out from underneath the burden of who you really are. And everyone, by the way, is trying to figure out how to explain that. As an atheist, I would have said, and I toggle back and forth on this, and I still know a lot of atheists who believe this, that we are born inherently good. As babies, we are innocent. And what corrupts us over time is our environment, other factors. You start with a clean slate, but that's not really true. You know, once you have your own kids, you know that's not true. We are inherent. You don't have to teach your kids to be impatient. They are impatient by nature. You don't need to teach your kids to throw a fit. They throw fits by nature. We have to teach them otherwise because our fallen nature is what it is. We know it. We see it in children. I think to argue that kids are a clean slate is either not to have kids or to be very romantic about your ideas. It's okay. I mean, this is the moral project is us trying to resist the desires, the fallen desires of our heart. Because we think there's a standard we should submit to, a moral standard. That's the moral project. I think that's okay, but we at least need to admit it. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll look at the last response to this objection, that all that matters is being a good person. Now, it comes to sharing our faith, the entire world is broken into two groups. Believers, unbelievers. Those are also broken into two groups. Some believers are so committed to this that they don't even care if you got the body of Jesus and drug it around town in front of them. They are still going to believe because they don't care about the evidence. Then there are people who are having questions. They're believers, but they have questions. Then there are non-believers who are so adamant that during a presentation like this at Ohio State or at Michigan or wherever you're speaking on a campus, they're live tweeting profanity at you for the entire talk, right? I've had that happen.
Me too.
There you go.
Last,
from your own congregation.
last Sunday.
That's not right. And then you have people who are non-believers, but they have questions. Now, it turns out, as I'm speaking about the gospel to people, I recognize that I'm talking to all four groups, but only these three are paying attention. I call this the three-quarter principle. These three are paying attention. Now, in this last response, I want to step into something that I see a lot in my work as a police officer, as a detective, because I work with a group of people and first responders, either on the law enforcement side or on the medical side or the fire department side. All of us have this kind of superhero thought, right? Maybe we were raised with great admiration for superheroes, comic book characters, right? And there's a sense in which first responders are kind of like superheroes, right? They step in danger. When you have a problem, you call them. You rely on these folks. They kind of come to the rescue. Sometimes they are called rescue units. So we have this sense that we got into this because we have that desire to be the superhero, to be the one who runs to the rescue. And if you do that for very long, you have a sense that you're, this idea of the flawed superhero that has a dark side. Why is it so provocative? Because most of the time you don't think of it that way. You think of yourself as being in this role of superhero. It's sometimes hard to convince those of us who are in law enforcement that we are just like the other guys, but for the grace of God, we could be committing the crimes instead of solving the crimes. I mean, I noticed that in my own working cold cases, that many of the suspects I took to jail are just like me. They're just like all of us. They're regular folks who did one murder, one thing they shouldn't have done 30 years ago, but since then they've been stellar. You'd never know they did that 30 years ago. Any of us could do that thing 30 years ago, but for the grace of God, our buttons weren't pushed. I only say this because I remember having this conversation with my partner, and he's not a believer, but his children are. One of them is, and he could tell he's constantly thinking about these things, and in some ways kind of justifying his non-belief, justifying his position as a non-believer. And I remember him one day saying to me, kind of reflecting this superhero kind of notion, that Jim, look, if there's a good God who has created for us after this life a good heaven, then people like you and me are going to be in there because we're good people. We're not the bad guys. We're the ones who are risking our lives daily to put bad guys in jail so they won't harm our community. I mean, in that sense, we are the epitome of the good guys. That's why they'll call us. They call the good guys. They come over and they do this. They take care of business. They save us. We rescue people. So I found myself having to challenge the character of God that my partner has assumed from culture. You think there's a good God out there. God is good. We hear this expression all the time. God is good, God is great, whatever. I think that's a bad expression. And so this third response capitalizes on the expression, if they're a good God, then good people end up in a good heaven. All that matters is being good. So I want to be able to challenge that as I did with him. I actually reject the notion that God is good. And I want to share with you how I reject it so you can see that I'm not really being heretical. I think the standard is actually even better, higher. So let's look at the response. Here it is. The third response to this objection, that being a good person is all that really matters. Okay, if there's a God, why would you think that good, you're being good, is good enough? Look, okay, if God exists, okay, if God is the creator of everything from nothing, he has that kind of power. You typically, I don't care what tradition you come out of, if you're describing something as God, you believe that thing is all powerful. That being is all powerful. Okay, if God is all powerful, then he has the power. First of all, he certainly had the power to create everything from nothing. A God that's that powerful, that can create everything from nothing, has the power to eliminate all imperfections, including moral imperfection. What I mean to say is this: if there is an all-powerful God, okay, if there's a God like that out there, he isn't a good God. He isn't morally good. He is morally perfect. Perfect, because he has the power to eliminate imperfection. Now, think of your best day. Think of everything you did, the day when you want, if there's one day you could snapshot and send to God to earn your way into heaven, I want you to think of it. You were probably good that day. You may have been really good that day. But you weren't perfect. There was some little place, some little moral imperfection. Overall, you would say you had a really great day. You were really good that day. But you've never been perfect. I've never been perfect. Only one man has ever lived the perfect life, and that was Jesus. But he had an advantage over you and me, right? He was God incarnate, the morally perfect God. The standard is not goodness. The standard is perfection. So you have to reword this. Being a perfect person is all that really matters, not being a good person. Why would you think that your goodness would impress a morally perfect God? So what I want them to see here is that the nature of God has been underestimated by those people who think that God is good and all you have to be is good. No, God is perfect. All you have to be is perfect. If you're perfect, you're good to go. If you're less than perfect, you've got the same problem I have. Is that we will someday be in the... And these two are like oil and water. They do not mix. Your morally imperfect being and person, you, does not belong in a morally perfect environment called heaven, in front of a morally perfect being. We see this in the Old Testament, right? When Isaiah sees God, what is his reaction to God? Hey, good to see it. No, he falls. He is prostrate because he knows, he now gets it in the presence of a morally perfect God. He sees who he really is. I think part of the problem we have with these kinds of claims is that we don't know who we really are. And we haven't thought carefully about logically what would it mean to be God. The kind of perfection, including moral perfection, that's part of his nature. So if you're just shooting to do the thing that would please God, well, moral perfection is what you're going to have to shoot for. And you're good enough, your try is not good enough. It's a category error. You can't be in the... Now, you could be positioned in such a way that you could be in presence of a perfect God, even though you're practically imperfect. In other words, in practice, you are imperfect. But you could be positionally perfect if you were to take on the perfection of Christ. Then although you are practically imperfect, even after becoming a believer, you're still going to be practically imperfect in the sense you'll still make mistakes. But you will be positionally perfect, as Hebrews, in the book of Hebrews, it tells us that we are perfected because of what we are now trusting in, who we are trusting in. He punches the ticket for us. God does look at you and your practical imperfection, but sees the perfect position that Christ is in. And on that basis, he embraces you. So this is why we still have a problem. And we still got to solve it. And the only way to solve it is to rely on the one perfect person, which isn't you. That's Jesus. Hope that helps you to kind of think through these issues more practically as you respond to your friends. And I'll see you right here next week at Cold Case Christianity.
Thanks for joining us at the Cold Case Christianity broadcast. If you're interested in more information about this week's topic, please visit coldcasechristianity.com. For a thorough investigation of the reliability of the New Testament Gospels and the case for Christianity, be sure to purchase Cold Case Christianity, God's Crime Scene, Forensic Faith, and Alive.